Hi, my name is Adrian Crockett, and I'm the General Manager for Microsoft Cloud Financial Services. In today's session, we're going to be talking about AI within the financial services industry. I'm glad to be joined today by three experts in financial services and AI. All three of them have had decades worth of experience where they've been combining financial services expertise with artificial intelligence. So first of all, I introduce you to Adam. Adam is a managing director and group head at BlackRock, where he leads alpha engineering and also the digital asset lab for Aladdin Engineering. Nej is the group head of Workspace at London Stock Exchange Group, and Jan is the CEO and co-founder of 𝗦𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗶𝗁. So I'm excited to be joined by these three, and let's dig into the topic today. So Adam, what are your thoughts about what's different with generative AI versus the previous waves of AI that we've seen in financial services?
Sure, and thanks, Adrian, for having us today. I'm very excited to have this discussion with everyone. I was actually thinking about this and reflecting on my career and really this notion of really software eating finance and really this blending of math and finance and software has been playing out for many years, as you were pointing out. And I think what's different this time is it's more cognitive. And so the best mental model that I have there is this knowledge pyramid or knowledge hierarchy, where it's all about turning data to information, information to knowledge, and knowledge to wisdom. I think what we're doing now is we're able to tackle more of these higher order cognitive parts of finance. But there are past precedents, whether that was from the algorithmic trading era. For example, when I worked at Goldman, I was we called ourselves traders who can code or engineers who can trade, because it was all about encoding what was previously done over voice trading into software. But I would just maybe end the answer by saying it's still co-pilot, not autopilot, and sort of maybe I'll pass it back to you to get the others' views.
Nice for you to throw a Microsoft term in there. So Nej, what are your thoughts on this topic?
Thank you. Great to be here. And certainly, I think I'll start by echoing actually Adam's sentiment in that the opportunity here from my perspective is really transforming roles. I think previously, certainly with an algo execution lens, for example, the maturity of platforms that are instruction and rules based is certainly not new. And the market's pretty sophisticated in building systematic ways of trading. I think what the potential, and we should note that it is still early days, notwithstanding some real exciting potential that is inevitable, means that we do have the opportunity to scale the ability to do the things that we are familiar with in terms of both discovery, augmenting users from a consumer perspective, but also the producers involved in various different roles within the investment lifecycle as well. So I'm looking forward to that too.
Thanks,Nej. Jan, you're coming from startup land, so a little bit different to some of the other firms here today. Give us your perspectives, sort of to this question.
Yeah, and again, thank you for having me here. It's really exciting to talk about this topic. As you say, there's been a lot of focus on this. I think we're all, to an extent, still learning about some of the implications it might have and what the roadmap for this is going to look like. What I would say, just going back to your question specifically, what's new and different this time around? As you say, AI has been around for a long time, and already it has found a wide range of use across different industries. What I would say is that there are two things that are new and exciting about generative AI specifically, which is, on the one hand, as the name suggests, it's able to create entirely new content. It uses and relies on past data as kind of a prompt to anticipate then a set of possible future outcomes. Meaning, like what we hopefully do as humans, it can learn from the past, but then tries to imagine the future. And I think my background from asset management, it makes it particularly exciting for that field, because financial market participants, analysts, hedge fund managers, advisors always want to be forward-looking. And so having this ability now to rely on technology to assist in that effort, I think is absolutely transformational. I would say the second point, and this is evident particularly in the popularity of large language models like ChatGPT, the ability of these models to also understand our intent dramatically lowers the barrier to using such models. And so in my mind, what we internally often speak of is this as the kind of Rosetta Stone moment, for analytic software. it's been long the case that machines have relied on language models for a way to communicate with us, but now we're able to speak back to them, instruct them, ask follow-up questions, and so on. And so what used to be a monologue has become a dialogue, which again, from just the point of view of a software builder, is extremely exciting because it, I think, dramatically increases the scope of the audience that is now able to go straight to the data to make their decisions and so on.
Yeah, there's some great points in there. Like I particularly like the point around the generating content, which is obviously within the name, but often we don't actually focus enough on the fact that there is new content that's actually being generated as part of this process. And then also the Rosetta Stone moment, sort of, is this actually the pivotal moment, the democratization moment? So with that, I wanted to switch back to Adam. When you're thinking about AI, what do you think the most transformative thing is going to happen associated with this generation of AI within the financial services?
So I think we tried to break it down into very simple pillars, actually not even using the word AI and making it less about, the number of parameters in the models and more about the user experience. And so really we broke it down into 3 simple pillars. The first one is productivity, which is, how will this technology make us all more productive in our daily lives? And there's past precedents of that before. If you think of the previous internet era where, people got access to search, it was a very similar sort of, augmentation of intelligence and really making us smarter. And so I think that's probably pillar 1. Pillar 2 is just the client experience. Is it a better client experience or not? Just like the example of when touchscreens came out, the analog in the past being, every client's going to expect to use the touchscreen now. And I think that's really, there's an element of this really becoming table stakes there. And then the third pillar is really just around investment insights. And that has been, AI has been sort of helping drive investment insights for many years. We've been discussing, but this will drive a new generation of investment insights based upon the previous conversations that you and Jan were having around. Now we can actually generate content. I think unlocks a whole new set of, going back to the knowledge hierarchy, more of this knowledge wisdom layer of use cases that previously before weren't possible. There was more analytical AI. So to shift from analytical AI to generative AI is kind of the mental model in finance that I have there.
Thanks for that, Adam. I particularly like the portion where you were talking about the manner in which you were triaging. Can you talk a little bit about, sort of the process? Obviously, for all of us, there was some point where we worked out that this was slightly different to the previous periods, and the number of use cases that were possible here are exceptionally large. I often think about this as the lines of business actually being powered to come up with the use cases here in this generation of AI. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you actually first came across the problem that there were going to be so many use cases, and then how you actually came up with the triaging framework that you just introduced us to?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you might have heard me say this before around, the Mark Twain saying of like, history doesn't repeat itself, but it does often rhyme. So I tend to be a student of history and a student of past regimes. And sort of, the last 10 years, I've been studying this notion of the 4th Industrial Revolution, which is really defined as almost like the co-pilot era. It's really this era of humans and machines working together that's been playing out, and now it's really accelerating. And so to answer your question, I think breaking it down to that simple 3-pillar framework was almost step 1, so we can have same language to talk about the use cases. The second one is just almost like basic like business school ROI analysis of the 50 ideas. There's the mega ideas that will transform the industry and all of our companies. And so how do you have a framework? Because the other 49 could be good ideas, but potentially distracting. I think we're in a moment right now where the opportunity cost is so high because all we're saying is it's so exciting. There's the internet sort of moment or kind of happening, and it's compressed now because things are happening a lot faster. So in other words, every decision we make on what product to build and what not product to build has the highest opportunity cost in human history. So in other words, I think there's just some of it's almost like not chasing the hype and just getting back to the basics.
So Adam, if I were to take the 2 elements there, it's almost like I'm thinking across, sort of that answer across 2 different dimensions. The first one is obviously having a very solid triaging framework. And then the second one is, it sort of sounds funny, but is not forgetting that we're actually from finance and that we should, sort of eat our own dog food and actually go through and really do some financial analysis on what we believe the benefits are going to be, so that we can really make sure that we're actually focusing in the right areas. Is that really, sort of a good, sort of mental model for what the way that you're thinking about things?
Oh, that was well said, Adrian. Yeah, and I think thinking from a client lens too. Again, at the end of the day, we're all here because of our clients. So I think about what's better for our clients. We've talked a lot about better, faster, cheaper. And so what's the better, faster, cheaper solutions that benefit our clients is really the kind of, just grounding principle. How do we do this safely, securely, use partners and also be innovative at the same time.
No, and I think that, Adam, that customer centricity is really important. And with that sort of concept in mind, I might actually turn to Nej from London Stock Exchange Group, who, as I mentioned before, looks after or is head of product for the Workspace product, which has got hundreds of thousands of end users there. So, Nej, can you talk a little bit about how you're thinking of leveraging generative AI for your targeted personas, which are all what we might refer to as democratized or end users? And then also how you're thinking about that fitting into the overarching workflow, more to Adam's point.
Thank you, Adrian. Sure. Well, look, I think, as you say, we have an abundant ecosystem of users, and they span across a broad array of different types of personas, including wealth advisors, execution traders, portfolio managers, risk managers, and so on. So for us, it's very much about understanding the needs, the pain points, and the opportunities that those respective personas need in order to deliver effective solutions. As we start to think about the role of generative AI for these types of users, actually something that I'm very, very much focused on, and again, Adam mentioned this, is workflows, and I think it's also interesting as we think about the phase from an industry level of generative AI. Certainly, user interfaces and standalone experiences are ones that have really been embraced, over the last year or so. But I think we're moving into a phase where we're going to see how they are effectively, integrated in a meaningful way in the context of, persona-driven user journeys, and that's quite exciting, and that's the way we're looking at it. So, whilst there are some foundational capabilities that pertains to, discovery, the efficiencies of bringing together different data sets and visualization and summaries, serving for, saving, end users significant time. That's certainly something we'll keep an eye on. It will differ in terms of how we actually curate those experiences depending on the respective personas.
Thanks, Nej. Now, I think, one thing that when I think about the four of us that, sort of really resonates across all of our previous experiences, I think all of us are sort of looking at generative AI in some regards of the previous pains that we had in our jobs. And, sort of when I think back to, sort of I spent nearly 2 decades as an investment banker, and I saw the first iterations of generative AI and then started imagining what it could be, there were just a wealth of ideas that really came out. So, Nej, I know that you've been working on a series of different products that are going to be impacting investment bankers, or me in my past life, as you might say. Can you tell us a little bit about, sort of some of the things that you're working on there?
Sure. And look, again, we're certainly looking at investment bankers, but these capabilities will be applicable to other, types of personas and users as well. One scenario is quite simply starting with the context of the problem statement. We're familiar with fragmented workflows today. That's why we've got many different screens. Lots of people are copying and pasting. Adam talked about productivity, and I think, it's fair to say, incurring not just a user level, a system level opportunity cost in that regard. So, what we're doing is quite simply removing the friction. We're collapsing the need to move from multiple applications into one experience. We're embracing the move towards natural language interfaces, and we're, as part of that journey, enabling the generation and the visualization of key insights. All of these types of steps sound simple, but actually they take, bankers hours of time. And while they're on the move, what they really need is the most salient points as quickly as possible. So these types of experiences achieve those types of outcomes.
So thanks for that, Nej. And at this point, we're actually going to quickly break, and we're going to show a demo of some work that Microsoft and London Stock Exchange Group have been working on together, particularly about the area that Nej was just discussing. So with that, I'll press play.
Microsoft is introducing a new Microsoft Teams app that streamlines meeting preparation for financial services with a focus on investment bankers. It is powered by generative AI, Microsoft Cloud for Financial Services, and LSEG News, Data, and Analytics. 𝗦𝗽𝗲 is an investment banker at 𝗦𝗲𝗀𝗶𝘁𝗀𝗃 Bank. She has an upcoming meeting with one of her top clients, 𝗬𝗏𝗀𝗻. 𝗦𝗽𝗲 navigates to the meeting invite in Microsoft Teams and clicks on Meeting Prep. She is off to a flying start with a single view of 𝗬𝗏𝗻's key financial news and data from LSEG Workspace. To gain an overview of potential topics for discussion, 𝗦𝗽𝗲 quickly looks through news themes, which highlight trending topics discussing 𝗬𝗏𝗻. Next, she clicks on ESG and Environment to review. She instantly has access to the most relevant news and transcripts from thousands of LSEG sources, consolidated into one concise read, saving her hours of research. 𝗦𝗽𝗲's attention is then drawn to the action items from the last internal meeting discussing 𝗬𝗏𝗻, generated by Microsoft Graph. Upon review, she is satisfied that all critical action items have been completed. These insights are supplemented by all the prior work and related files created by 𝗦𝗽𝗲's team, all neatly consolidated in one place. To make the client meeting as productive as possible, 𝗦𝗽𝗲 wants to send a note to Abby and Hannah at 𝗬𝗏𝗻. She clicks Draft Email to Client, and the Meeting Prep app generates a draft email, saving 𝗦𝗽𝗲 valuable time. She copies it to Outlook and reviews for potential adjustments before sending it off to her clients. A few hours prior to the meeting, 𝗦𝗽𝗲 opens the Meeting Prep report on her tablet and refreshes the data. She sees updated information under Key Highlights for the meeting, based on recent news, and scrolls down to see the latest materials for her team. She clicks on the meeting presentation, feeling confident that she has everything she needs for a successful meeting. 𝗦𝗽𝗲 has been able to compress days of work down to minutes. This is just one example of how Microsoft is working with strategic partners, such as LSEG, to drive AI transformation and empower financial services organizations to achieve more. Learn more about the future of financial services in the era of AI at aka.ms/cloud for financial services.
So hopefully that gave you a little bit of an overview of some pragmatic use cases that we're actually seeing across the industry. And this one particular one that Nej and I were talking about, we're really focused on investment bankers. But now I wanted to actually switch to the other side of the market. So, thanks, Nej, obviously, for those comments. But really, now let's actually switch over to Jan, who comes at us from a completely different background. Jan was previously a chief investment officer. And I think the comment that, sort of some of the technology that he's working on really does come from his previous workflows and avoiding some of the pain there. So, Jan, previously when we caught up, you've really discussed about how, as a chief investment officer, you used to obviously come up with the ideas, but then actually delegate that work out to an army of analysts who would then actually have to go off and validate all your hypotheses. Generative AI seems to be a moment to actually rethink even organizational design of a lot of financial services firms. What are your thoughts on the role of generative AI in democratizing workflows within financial services?
Yeah, I think this touches, on a lot of the pain points that were discussed prior to this by Nej and Adam. And I would say, if I crudely describe the process that we had in place, in fact, I think that's a process that is probably replicated across a number of large asset managers. It involved a kind of a central team of analysts, data scientists that you'd be able to lean on for risk or quantitative investment analysis. So if you're a wealth advisor, if you're a portfolio manager, if you're an analyst, and there was some bit of analysis to be done, there often was a resource that you could rely on to perform this. Now, of course, to an extent, this is analogous to having a supercomputer. It's incredibly powerful, but its centralized nature as a shared resource inevitably involved some backlogs. And so you had to wait your turn, which often made it impractical with very fast tactical decisions that you may have to make in a fast-moving market. And so a popular alternative that was developed was, of course, the kind of quick and dirty calculation in a spreadsheet, or even perhaps more frequently, just go with your gut. Now, the downside of this is that when we when I was still managing a portfolio, I had thought that we know that Nej has wealth of data that they make available to a lot of asset managers, and we all rely on that data for a number of critical decisions. I had always thought of myself as having explored virtually everything that DataStream would offer, and that at the time Refinitiv had made available, only to discover that, having thought of myself as a power user, I probably scratched about 1% of the total data that was available. And so it made us think, well, there's this extraordinary wealth of data that exists there, but we don't seem to be able to unlock all of the value, partly through the workflow. And what the task became was, how can you generate some of these extraordinary insights from all of the data that we have available and have been given by the London Stock Exchange Group and so on. Generative AI and the two factors that I mentioned before, which is ability to imagine the future and understand users' intent, enable the existence of what I would call an investing co-pilot. And I use it as a term that I know has now become more popularized as something that, again, also what Adam was mentioning, isn't making decisions for you, but is able to assist in making decisions because it's able to do some fast calculation. The ability of a system like this to process a vastly larger proportion of the data that it has access to, it might mean that it's not as powerful as the supercomputer I was describing, but it sits on your desk and is available for your decisions right there in front of you. So you can access its powers to answer questions that sometimes require fast answers, and you don't want to or would like to make it a little bit more rigorous by relying on data analysis for those answers.
So thanks, Jan, for that. Now I believe that you're going to be able to share a product release that Toggle's been working on. So with that, how about I hand over so we can see that demo?
So I want to give you a quick demonstration of what Toggle AI is all about. In essence, think of Toggle as being an investing co-pilot that is able to read the news, analyze a vast amount of data, all on your behalf in order to help you better understand market price action, your portfolio, and so on. And the most important thing is that because it's powered by a large language model, it's able to do all of that at the speed of natural language. So you, the user, could, for example, just be asking questions such as, what's happening in my portfolio today? Very natural starting point. And what the system will then do is dig deep, try to analyze what's currently happening, give you a summary of the performances, and also highlight if there are any relevant events coming up. For example, there might be earnings events and so on, and so it'll then highlight the stocks that might be relevant for you. And so you look at one of them, General Smarts, and you think, okay, there's an earnings event coming up. I wonder what will happen to this security if it actually beats or misses earnings expectations. And yet again, you can see that the analysis itself is generated instantly. And what the system has done in the background is gone to all of the prior earnings announcements and analyzed the pattern of behavior around them. So then you can say, okay, well, what if it beats by 25 cents? And again, I simply write that out. The system is generating the analysis, and it actually gives me instantly the price action here highlighted by the green bars, and shows me that a month later, after a beat of that amount, the stock could be up 10%. Now, you can always dig deeper into the data as well, because the important thing here is to have complete traceability and really be able to feel and see the data based on which the answers are being generated. With generative AI models, there's always the question of accuracy, and so you want to make sure that you're not getting a hallucinated answer. You can, for example, if you're an analyst inside a large financial institution or a wealth advisor on a large platform, you might then also want to tap into some of the research that has been generated over the months and tap into that knowledge base. And so you can ask, what are the major risks to their earnings this quarter? And the system will instantly find the right documents, summarize them, give you the link to this, and allow you to kind of get a sense of what is the house view on a specific security. Now, you can then plot a chart, just say what has the year-to-date performance been, and you see this is instantly generated. You can zoom in. You can then play around with it a little bit. You can say, okay, well, I'm actually interested in how this security has done since the Fed started hiking rates. Now, do you remember exactly when that began? It doesn't matter. Simply let the system find all of the relevant information for you, and it'll basically go back exactly to the date and say like, from that point onwards, this is what the security done. So it's gone from about 240 to 387. And again, you can also do analysis about hypotheticals. How will this security do when the Fed eventually starts cutting rates? And it'll generate, like it did with the earnings, instant analysis that will effectively allow you to see, this is what the performance was. You can actually also see when this has happened before, so previous hiking cycles. You can see the entire history and actually verify that the security cycles that it's examining are correct. And finally, it gives you a quick quality assessment. So for example, in this case, it'll say like, actually, you know what? The pattern is not that reliable. And so this isn't something you should put too much stock into. There are other questions that you could ask. For example, what happens to GSMT when tech rises 20% in a year? And again, hypotheticals like that can be answered almost instantly by the system. You simply basically tell it, this is what I would like to analyze, run the scenario, and the system returns complete analysis that helps everybody get an insight into how a specific condition is going to impact this security.
Thanks, Jan. That demo was excellent. Are there any key points that you want us to really be walking away with from that demo? Key highlights that, sort of should really be sinking into the audience?
Yeah, I would say that the main source of excitement for me of the technology that we're seeing is really bringing closer to a larger audience this ability to lean on the data in making their decisions, right? If we make the process of taking in the data, analyzing it, many more people, I think, will reach for that when they're asked to make a decision about a portfolio allocation, about advice to a client, and so on. So the scope within financial services, I think it's enormous, and I think it has repercussions for the organizations up and down the chain. So both the owners of data, the owners of analytical tools, as well as obviously then the users of this ecosystem, which are asset managers, wealth managers, and so on.
Thanks for that, Jan. A question to everyone now. So for all of us, we've been fairly heavily involved, not only in the current AI journey, but also in previous iterations of AI journeys. However, not all of our customers and partners have been involved to the same extent that we have. Just wondering if each of you could just give one piece of advice to the people who haven't actually started off on their AI journeys. What is the first thing that you'd be suggestive of opening up with? So I'll hand back to Adam for his thoughts there.
So I would say the first thing is almost just trying to get a simple strategy on paper. Starting simple, always trying to jump in. I'm a big believer in crawl, walk, run strategies. And so what's the crawl strategy, so to say? So, because I think that creates the flywheel, and you learn how to walk when you're crawling and running when you're walking. So I'm a big believer in that. And I would also say, maybe somewhat counterintuitively, think about it beyond AI. So I think we're in this world of, we talked about the fourth industrial revolution playing out, which is a confluence of many technologies beyond even AI playing out, hyperscale cloud, blockchain, many other sort of, there's quantum computing around the corner. And having an integrated tech strategy, I think, would be my advice, as opposed to just chasing necessarily what's at the peak of a hype cycle at any one point.
So Adam, that answer really resonates with me. When I was in investment banking, I always used to have a rule that no one was allowed to start analysis until they actually drew up what they were going to do on the whiteboard. So that seems very much of, a similar thought process in terms of, let's actually make sure that we've got the strategy and we understand what we're actually trying to achieve before we actually kick off on the projects. So Nej, sort of what are some thoughts from yourself?
Well, look, again, I'll echo, I always start with outcomes. So I think being clear about the why, the what, and, and then the how is critically important. And AI, I share the sentiment, is an enabler, for an overall outcome. So I think that's critically important. The second piece is certainly within financial services. If you think generally about, where we are with Gen AI, obviously, very early days, I think for, some level of entertainment, if you like, and interaction. It's prevalent. I think as you look at industries like healthcare and financial services, clearly the barriers to entry are higher. So I think being very cognizant of a compliance first approach, I think, is critical. Last thing I'd say is, thinking about accessibility and the integrity of the relevant data sets at the first mile is also important, as opposed to figuring out what you need later in the journey.
Yep, and Nej, I think that point around data, and none of this is true unless the data quality is there, is something that we don't actually speak enough about. And I really want to reinforce that getting the data estate in the right way, manner set up is still, sort of one of the most important things that we can do, and actually then springboarding off those data estates and to bring to life the true value. Jan, sort of what are your thoughts in terms of the, one key takeaway for people who are about to start their AI journeys?
Yeah, I would say, and I think this is complementing the point that both Nej and Adam were making, but the initial focus certainly can be on aspects of this technology that can already be useful today, even if they may seem a little bit mundane. So I would suggest that it's not sacrificing the larger vision of what this technology might be able to do in 3 to 5 years, if in the short term, you're instead using it for certain things that are solving real pain points, but aren't necessarily creating a fully autonomous wealth advisor, a fully autonomous portfolio manager, and so on. I would say some of those things may eventually come. The problem, I think, that people get too caught up into the grander vision of this and then think, well, if that's not ready, then there are no components of this that I can use today. And in fact, I think quite to the contrary, we're seeing a lot of applications that when we show them to potential users, they're extremely, extremely pleasantly surprised by how much of their tasks this can already address today. So I would say the focus on specific use cases today, really understanding those, and then implementing more ambitious approaches as time and compliance, to Nej's point, which is definitely in financial services an important component, permit.
And Jan, I think the point that you made just then is really critical, and linking it back to Adam's ROI, or sort of financial analysis of different opportunities point that we spoke about at the outset. And one of the things that we often see in the marketplace is, for many firms, the first step that they actually take in their AI journey is not about that, sort of that next generation of end user experiences, but can actually be about, sort of what we do today in order to actually develop that next generation of experiences. So specifically, we find that firms who are actually using GitHub Copilot actually end up moving faster, not just because of the GitHub Copilot, but also, and I think this is more important, getting the engineers and the product people in a mindset where they're actually receiving value out of the products straight away. And then they can actually then switch their mindset to how they can actually do that for customers. So I think that's often, sort of a really interesting starting point. And with that, I'd really like to thank the 3 of our guests today. So we've had Adam from BlackRock, Nej from LSEG, and then also Jan for Toggle. I think we've really got a wealth of information, not only about how to start off thinking about AI strategy, but then also going through and coming up with the combination of use cases that we can get started with, the frameworks that they went through, and then also, importantly, how they have also linked their AI strategies back to financial terms, or ROI, as Adam mentioned, or MPVs, sort of are really trying to actually put a solid financial framework behind that, which is important. And then the final thing that is really critical here is making sure that we really focus on the implications of workflow, and that we keep AI in the mindset of what the overarching workflow that we're actually trying to achieve. Okay, and with that, I'd like to thank everybody for watching today, and we look forward to working with you in the future.